All right, now we have a graph that is showing the Curiosity rover at top speed, and it's asking us to interpret this proportional relationship. Now I first look at the graph and I ask myself, how do I know it's proportional? Well, yep, it's straight. There's a straight line and it's going through the origin. Excuse me. So to interpret it, it means to make sense of it and to understand what's happening. So if this graph, if I look at the table or the graph, I notice that it's talking about the time in seconds, which is your x-axis, and your distance in inches, which is your y-axis. Okay? So it's talking about the speed of the Curiosity rover as fast as it's going, because that's the top speed, and it's comparing time and distance. Okay? So each point that's plotted, I need to interpret what it means. And so I'm going to start and take the first point. The first point that they have marked is the origin, 0, 0. And I want to make sense of what this actually represents. So I look at this and I notice that the first value relates to the time, because that's your x value, and the second relates to the distance, or inches. So when I'm talking about speed, I'm talking about how fast I travel, how far do I go in a certain given amount of time. So if I look at this point, I can tell and decide that the rover travels 0 inches in 0 seconds. That is what that point stands for. Okay? Now I could say the rover travels, or the rover travels 0 seconds, takes 0 seconds to travel 0 inches. However, typically when we talk about speed, we talk about how far it goes in the amount of time. So the reason that I put inches before seconds, the y before the x, is because we talk about that when we talk about speed. It sounds different when we talk about in 0 seconds, the rover travels 0 inches. However, you can word it either direction. Just make sure you're labeling it correctly. Then we have another point. And our second point that we have up here is 1, 1.5, or 1 and 1 1/5. Or I'm sorry, 1 5/10. And we have to interpret what this means. Again, we need to identify what is it talking about. Are we talking about seconds and distance, or inches? Well, the 1 relates to the seconds, and the 1.5 relates to the inches, because your x is your time and your y is your inches. So in a sentence, I could say the rover travels 1.5 or 1 5/10 inches in 1 second. Okay, that's an interpretation. That is also a unit rate, if you didn't notice that. And that unit rate could be utilized for finding other amounts as well, because we're going 1.5 inches per 1 second. And remember, unit rate relates to the amount per 1. And then we have a third point. And our third point is 3 and 4 5/10, or 4.5. And this is stating that the rover travels 4.5 inches. Again, the y value relates to the distance, in 3 seconds. So I have just made sense of all 3 of these points. And so when it's asking you to make sense or interpret them, it's asking you to write them out in words or in a phrase. How can you make sense of what the data is telling you? Okay? Again, that unit rate is really helpful because you can utilize that to find other amounts. So a lot of times people are looking for the unit rate so that they can find any distance. Because you know if you multiply 1 times whatever number you're looking for, you can always do the same for the a number of inches. And it's moving 1.5 inches every single second.